Hey guys, hoping all is well with everyone. In this video, we're going to be continuing the read-along of The Secret Zoo, Secrets and Shadows by Brian Chick. And last time we finished off, we completed chapter 14, so we'll be starting with chapter 15 today. And as always, please feel free to follow along, but let's jump right into it. Chapter 15, The Grottoes. Megan! Noah called out as he stood by the front door. I'm going over to Richie's. I'll be back by supper. From somewhere inside the Nowicki house came Megan's response. We just got home from school. It was Wednesday, the day after the incredible incident at Butterfly Nets. Yeah? So? A pause, then Megan's voice. Whatever. See you later. Noah tore out the front door and grabbed his bicycle from the garage. At the street, he turned in the opposite direction. He had no intention of visiting his friend. He was headed for Butterfly Nets for a better look at the secret zoo passage that Tank and Tameron had taken. His parents wouldn't be getting home from work for more than an hour, so he had enough time to do this. He sped down the street, swerving past kids who were still walking home from school. He turned onto the sidewalk beside Walker's Boulevard and soon pulled into the parking lot of the Clarksville Zoo. He left his bike and headed inside, waving his zoo membership card like a badge to the attendant at the booth. He hurried across the zoo and slipped into Butterfly Nets, which was no longer closed for construction. He walked beside the waterfalls and trees and beneath the gabled glass roof. Butterflies darted all around. He smiled at an elderly couple, then crossed the narrow bridge to the clearing where Tameron had held cross-training. He stood at the railing along the edge of the open space and peered through the trees until he spotted the tiger's faint paw prints. The markings faded away toward the back of a tall rock formation. Noah moved around for a better angle to see behind the rock, but couldn't find one. He could think of only one way to get a full look. Noah glanced over both shoulders. The elderly couple had wandered off, and now their backs to him. He took a deep breath and considered his next move. Don't do this, he told himself. Just go home. After glancing around a second time, he closed his thoughts, then slipped through the horizontal bars. He hunkered low and stepped softly forward, twisting his body to avoid branches. Somewhere, a door creaked. Noah stopped and peered out through the bushes and trees. Not far off, a family of 5 had just entered the building. 3 young kids were jumping around excitedly, pointing at butterflies. They were headed down the visitor path in Noah's general direction. A wave of panic washed over Noah. He hunkered lower than ever and hurried on. He reached the rock formation, which sat several feet away from the outside wall. The rock reached in the glassy heights, a waterfall splashing noisily down its front side. Butterflies were perched along it, warming in the spot of sunlight. On the ground in the near private space between the rock and the wall, a flight of stairs led in the dark earth. Here, the paw prints ended. Were the grottos at the end of the stairs? More than a dozen butterflies flew out of the ground and scattered into the air. Somewhere in the exhibit, one of the children shrieked excitedly. Fear jolted Noah. He shouldn't be doing this. Tameron had warned against entering the grottos. He'd said the scouts could get hurt, lost, or worse. But Noah needed to learn the full truth about the secret zoo. From the descenders to the grottos, too much was being kept secret. If everyone Noah cared about was in danger, he needed to fully understand what they were dealing with. He shut off his thoughts and took a single step down, then another, and another. The cool air sank into his flesh and musty odor filled his head. He traded the light of the exhibit for the darkness of the underground. At the bottom of the stairs, a gloomy opening was at his right. It was perhaps 6 feet tall and 4 feet across. Noah peered into the opening but couldn't see much. But when he stepped into the corridor, it suddenly illuminated. In the walls, the few light bulbs were set. Noah's movements must have triggered them to go on. Wide-eyed, Noah stared around. The short tunnel headed straight for 10 feet and then stopped at 2 branches, one left and one right. He walked down and stared into the branches. Each was perhaps 50 feet long, and each had 5 or 6 new branches, mouths to new tunnels. All the entrances were covered with velvet curtains. The grottos. Did the tunnels go to the secret zoo or somewhere else? He took 2 cautious steps down the left branch. Old bricks formed the walls and arched ceiling. As he walked, he swept his fingertips along the wall. The bricks touched him back with their damp coolness. Flecks of mortar broke away and peppered the ground. His thoughts rose like a voice in his head. Get out. Down here. It's too dangerous. Tameron. He told you so. But was it possible that the Descenders were trying to keep something from the Scouts? Could it be that the Grottoes weren't dangerous at all, and the secret society just wanted Noah and his friends to stay out of them? Above the mouths of the new branches were thin metal plates with words engraved upon them. From where he stood, Noah couldn't quite read them. Did the letters spell out the places the tunnels led to? For a better look, Noah walked on, but before he could reach the first tunnel, he halted. A cloud of something had burst through a distant branch. Inside it, colors shurned. Noah peered closely and realized what the cloud consisted of. Butterflies. Hundreds of them. Packed tightly together. They were pouring into the tunnel and streaming toward him. Noah didn't have time to react. Almost all at once, the butterflies swarmed around him. Their soft wing tips brushed his skin, and Noah became engulfed in their movement. He turned back. Blinded by butterflies, he walked with his arms stretched out in front of him, feeling his way for a short passage that led to the stairs. He thought again of Tameron. The Descender had warned him to stay out of the grottos. What was Noah about to pay a price for ignoring him? He shook his arms in front of his face, batting away butterflies. It didn't help. He still couldn't see a thing. Panic filled him, and Noah blindly ran forward, sweeping his hand along the wall, feeling for his way out. Had he already passed it? He worried he might slip into a wrong tunnel and end up in some other place. A bad place. Like the Darklands. His hand suddenly dove off the bricks and floated in space. A passage. Noah turned to it, but saw nothing through the stream of butterflies. He did his best to close out his fear and stepped forward. After only a few steps, the butterflies disappeared around him, and he saw the staircase that he'd climbed down. He glanced back. The butterfly swarm was stretching across the 2 branches that he'd originally seen. He didn't know where the butterflies were going, and he didn't care. He just wanted to be out of the grottos. He hurried up the steps and stared out from behind the rock. The elderly couple was nowhere in sight. He hurried through the trees and slipped through the railing back into the clearing. He gasped. The family of 5 was standing with their backs to him at the opposite edge of the open space. Noah had forgotten about them. One of the children swung around. The boy was no more than 4 years old, and his lips were encrusted in dry chocolate. He smiled broadly and pointed at Noah. "Look, Mommy," he said. The mother turned and to her face open with surprise. She touched her fingertips to her lips, then tugged on her husband's sleeve. Dale." The father faced Noah and took a step back, wide-eyed with shock. "Oh my gosh! What happened to you?" Noah stood there, unsure what was wrong. "Huh? How did—" The father's voice trailed off, and he pointed to Noah, his torsos, his legs, his feet. Noah scanned his body and almost fainted by what he saw. Butterflies were clinging to every inch of him. He wore them like clothes. He felt his cheeks flush. I don't know," he managed to say. He began to sweep his hands across his stomach and chest, and as if dusting off dirt after a head-first slide, butterflies flitted into the air. The parents stared on, slack-jawed. Before they could ask another question, perhaps about who he was, Noah turned and ran, brushing butterflies off his clothes as he went. At the exit, he slammed through the door and fled across the landscape of an increasingly peculiar and mystifying zoo. Chapter 16. Wide Walt. The next day, the Scouts had lunch at their usual spot on the long bench in the school cafeteria. As normal, all students had checked their manners at the door. Kids squealed and laughed and crunched potato chips, crumbs spread like dust. The day's meal consisted of a rubbery slip of meat, a mound of clumpy mashed potatoes, and a choice of vegetable, string beans or half-cooked corn. the latter being the popular choice, as it supplied ammunition for the catapults the kids made out of their plastic sporks. None of the scouts cared about eating. Richie rummaged through his meal, digging with his spork for something to inspire his appetite. As the scouts quietly discussed the incident at Butterfly Nets, 3 kids approached their table: Walter White and his 2 cronies, Dave and Doug. Walt's reputation was legendary. He was regarded as the meanest kid not only at Clarksville Elementary, but in the entire district. Where most bullies were tall, Walt was wide, startlingly so. His shoulders projected out twice as far as normal kids, making his head seem puny in comparison. When he walked, he swung his immense shoulders. Over his 5 years at Clarksville Elementary, those shoulders had swaggered past countless students, earning him the nickname Wide Walt. The scouts fell silent. Experience had taught them that it was best to deal with Walt by pretending invisibility. Eyeing the scouts, Walt jerked a thumb in their direction and said to his buddies, "Check it out! The action, dorks!" On cue, his cronies started to snort and snicker. Doug tossed a string bean that bounced off Richie's head and slipped through the small opening of his milk carton. Dave and Doug high-fived at the accomplishment. The scouts said nothing, prompting Wide Walt to remark, "That's what I thought." This was Walt's tagline. A few of his conversations ended without it. Most days, Wide Walt could be heard roaming the halls, terrorizing students while parroting, "That's what I thought. That's what I thought." Sometimes Noah wondered if Walt was less interested in picking on kids than in convincing others that in his minuscule head was, indeed, capable of thought. Walt ambled away, swinging his shoulders. Nodding at the crowd, his goons marched behind him, each holding a lunch tray pinched between a thumb and a finger, a display of strength for all to behold. "Oh, real nice," Richie commented as he peered into his milk carton. "Just great. Now I have a—" His voice trailed off as he searched the cloud of disbelief for the right words. "A stupid string bean in my milk." Ella slid her milk carton across the table. "Here, you can have mine." Richie pushed it back. "I don't want yours." He stared into the milky waters of his carton, a tiny lake where a green canoe floated. "I want mine, only with no string bean." Just then, someone sitting at the far end of the table started to shriek. It was Joey Reiser, the smallest, weakest kid in the history of 4th grade. Wide Walt was stuffing mashed potatoes down the front of Joey's shirt. Noah looked around. There wasn't a lunch attendant in sight. No surprise, Walt knew how to pick his moments. Walt scooped up another handful of mashed potatoes, this time from the plate of a 5th grader sitting nearby, and stuffed it down the back of Joey's shirt. Walter's cronies laughed their approval. "Why is this guy such an idiot?" Megan grumbled. Ella said, "He's mad because his head's the size of a raisin." "Should we do something?" Megan asked. "Yeah," said Richie as he stared at his plate. "Pretend we don't see anything. I don't need Walt coming back to fill my shirt with today's menu. I'm in no mood to spend the day with mashed potatoes cooling in my belly button." Noah heard himself say, "Walt, why don't you get a life?" before he could stop. Walt swung his meaty face in the direction of the insult. He locked eyes with Noah. With the better part of his arm still buried in Joey's shirt, he muttered, "What did you say?" leaving a pause between each word for effort. All across the cafeteria, heads spun. Students gasped, and sporks dropped from shaky fingertips. No one could believe it. Someone had just stood up to Wide Walt. Noah," Richie whimpered, "you might want to rethink your strategy here." Maybe Richie was right. No one in his right mind challenged Wide Walt. Noah turned away and stared at his tray. Walt smirked. Then he grunted and said, "That's what I thought." Hearing Walt's tagline filled Noah with rage. He pushed himself from the bench. He'd been through too much lately to back away from a 5th grade bully. In the past weeks, Noah had battled Sasquatches, flown on the back of a penguin, ridden on a polar bear, slept in an igloo, outrun hundreds of lunatic monkeys and ventured alone in forbidden territory in a secret kingdom. Compared to all this, Wide Walt was nothing. Noah strode down the length of the table and stood directly before Walt, who still had his hand in Joey's shirt. Quietly he said, "I'd love to pop that pimple you call a head." Walt's face went pale with shock. Absolute silence claimed the cafeteria. Behind him, Noah heard Richie whisper to Megan and Ella, "Well, girls, today's the day we die, I guess." An adult voice rang out, "Boys!" Standing at the cafeteria entrance was Mr. Kirshen, the mustached gym teacher. Seeing him, Walt lifted his arm from Joey's shirt and struck his best "I'm not doing nothing" pose. Mr. Kirshen took one look at Joey's potato-covered collar and yelled, "White! What in the world's going on here?" He quickly assessed the situation. "Get down to the principal office now." Wide Walt groaned. As he trudged past Noah, he sneered, "You're going to pay for this, dork. Oh, you're going to pay." Noah slid his foot out, tripping Walt. The biggest bully in the school stumbled forward, arms flailing. He crashed into an empty chair and banged against the table. A carton of chocolate milk spilled down his pants. "White!" Mr. Kirshen yelled. "Quit clowning around and get going." His face red with rage and embarrassment, Wide Walt headed across the cafeteria. His hulking shoulders slumped. The cafeteria kept silent. All eyes were on Noah, who walked back down the long bench and dropped into his seat. Ella leaned across the table and whispered, "That was totally the most awesome thing I have ever seen in my life." Noah slurped his milk and glanced at his friends. The other scouts sat there in silent awe, still entranced by the first act of rebellion against Wide Walter White. Ella grinned and went on, "Noah, don't you get how incredible that was? You almost toppled the great Tower of Walt." Noah couldn't restrain a smile. "Yeah, well, he's no bigger than a Sasquatch," Richie said, "but he smells just as bad." Together the scouts laughed. At one end of the cafeteria, Mr. Kirshen was dragging the bully to the principal's office. It may have seemed to some that the confrontation was over, but Noah was smarter than that. The confrontation had just begun. And I'll stop the video there, ending chapter 16, and in our next video of the Secret Zoo, we'll be continuing with chapter 17. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please take a good care of yourselves, and I hope to see you all very, very soon. Take good care.